Hello everyone, Chaplain Dan here. Today we live in a world that is filled with chaos, suffering, and an abundance of difficulties. And the question that we all have is what next? What next? What is next on the table of world history? Well, many years ago, an ancient king had a dream. And in that dream, something very important was revealed to him. The king knew that it was very important, but he had a problem. He could not recall the dream. So when he awoke, he called his wise men and he asked them to tell him what the dream was, what it was that he dreamt, and to give him the meaning of that dream. Well, his wise men could not give him or could not tell him what the dream was. Instead, they asked the king to tell them the dream, and then they would be able to tell the king what the dream meant. The king was furious, and he ordered that all of them should be put to death, since they couldn't tell him what it was that he dreamt. Among those wise men at that time in the kingdom of Babylon were four Hebrew boys altogether: Daniel and his three Hebrew friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they were among the wise men that were going to be put to death if they could not tell the king the dream and the meaning thereof. And so Daniel did what we all should do whenever we are faced with a problem, and that is to take it to the Lord in prayer. They got on their knees and they prayed, and shortly after that, Daniel went to sleep. In his sleep, the Lord showed Daniel the dream, the very dream that ancient ruler had, and also gave him the interpretation of that dream. The next day, Daniel arose and he went to the king. And he says, "O king, the dream that you had, in that dream you saw a great image. The head of that image was made of gold. The breast and the arms were of silver. The belly and the thighs of brass. The legs were of iron, and the feet were of iron mingled with clay." Then Daniel explained to the king that each of these metals meant or represented a kingdom. He says the first part of that image, which was the head of gold, represented the kingdom of Babylon. And he said to Nebuchadnezzar, "That is your kingdom. You are represented by that head of gold." After that, you had the breast and the arms of silver. He says, "After your kingdom, Nebuchadnezzar, will come another kingdom. It will be inferior to yours, but it will take over. And that is the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. And they were represented by the breast and the arms of silver. And after that, you would have another kingdom made of brass, or represented by brass. And just as how silver was inferior to gold, and then brass is inferior to silver, he says that kingdom will be inferior, but it will take over from the Medes and the Persians. And that kingdom represented the kingdom of Greece. And after Greece, you would move down to the legs of iron, which represent another kingdom that was going to take over. And that kingdom was the kingdom of Rome. And after Rome, you had the feet, partly iron and partly clay. And Daniel said what that meant was that there would be in the last days, or the latter part of Earth's history, kingdoms that are going to be as strong as iron, and some that are going to be as weak as clay. But just as how clay and iron does not mingle together, so these kingdoms will not come together. After Rome, there will not be another kingdom that will rule the world. Nebuchadnezzar was pleased. And in that dream, we see that 2,600 years of Earth's history was revealed. And it started from Babylon right there, right down to the end of time. Because Daniel said after that, as he saw a stone that was cut out without hands, and it came and smote the image on the feet, and the entire image crumbled and fell, and the stone became a great kingdom and filled the entire world. I want you to know that just as Daniel said, Babylon flourished from 605 BC until 539 BC. Then it faded away, and the Medes and the Persians came into power. The Persian Empire lasted from 539 BC until 331 BC, and that was followed by Greece. Alexander the Great conquering the world and conquering the Medes and the Persians, and the Greece ruled the world from 331 BC right down until 168 BC. But even the Grecian Empire did not last forever, because after that came the Romans. And the Romans were as strong as iron, even though they were inferior, but they were still strong. And they crushed Greece, and they took over. And the Roman Empire ruled the world from 168 BC right until 476 AD. And that is why when Christ walked the face of this earth, because we know BC was before Christ and then AD is after Christ. When Christ walked the face of this earth, the Jews at that time that wanted to put him to death could not do anything without permission from the Roman Empire. That is how Pilate came into play when it came to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And so the question is, what next? What is going to come? Rome ended, or the Roman Empire ended in 476 AD, and after that we had the divided kingdoms, or the kingdoms that were strong as iron and those that were weak as clay. But after Rome, no other kingdom were able to conquer the entire world. And we know that the French tried under Napoleon, and then we had the Germans under Hitler, and then we have today, you have countries like America and the USSR, well, not the USSR no more, but Russia. These nations are as strong as iron, but just as clay and iron would not mingle, after Rome there was no other one country unto today that was able to conquer the world. And so we're living in that time right now where we are down to in that image where we see the iron and the clay, those countries or nations or kingdoms that are weak and those that are strong, but they are not mingling. And we see that happening right in front of us every day. And so the question here, again, is what next? Well, stay tuned. And on our next installment, you will get the answer to that question. What next? God bless.